On August 6, 1945. During World War II, an American B-29 bomber dropped the world's first deployed atomic bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion immediately killed an estimated 80,000 people. Tens of thousands more would later die of radiation exposure. 3 days later, a second B-29 dropped another A-bomb on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 people. This was the historic moment which stunned the history. Japan's Emperor Hirohito announced his country's unconditional surrender in World War II in a radio address on August 15. Citing the devastating power of a new and most cruel bomb. Is this the only reason for Japan's unconditional surrender in the World War? If not, then what actually made Japan surrender?
Japanese armies now will be told where and how to surrender.
Will change the course of history.
By 1945, the Japanese had suffered a string of defeats for nearly 2 years in the Southwest Pacific, India, the Marianas Campaign, and the Philippines Campaign. In July 1944, following the loss of Saipan, General Hideki Tj was replaced as Prime Minister by General Kuniaki Koiso, who declared that the Philippines would be the site of the decisive battle. After the Japanese loss of the Philippines, Koiso in turn was replaced by Admiral Kantar Suzuki. The Allies captured the nearby islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa in the first half of 1945. Okinawa was to be a staging area for Operation Downfall, the Allied invasion of the Japanese home islands. Following Germany's defeat, the Soviet Union began quietly redeploying its battle-hardened forces from the European theater to the Far East, in addition to about 40 divisions that had been stationed there since 1941. As a counterbalance to the million-strong Kwantung Army, the Allied submarine campaign and the mining of Japanese coastal waters had largely destroyed the Japanese merchant fleet. With few natural resources, Japan was dependent on raw materials, particularly oil, imported from Manchuria and other parts of the East Asian mainland, and from the conquered territory in the Dutch East Indies. The destruction of the Japanese merchant fleet, combined with the strategic bombing of Japanese industry, had wrecked Japan's war economy. Production of coal, iron, steel, rubber, and other vital supplies was only a fraction of that before the war. As a result of the losses it had suffered, the Imperial Japanese Navy had ceased to be an effective fighting force. Following a series of raids on the Japanese shipyard at Kure, the only major warships in somewhat fighting order were 6 aircraft carriers, 4 cruisers, and 1 battleship, of which many were heavily damaged and none could be fueled adequately. Although 19 destroyers and 38 submarines were still operational, their use was also limited by the lack of fuel. By 1945, Japan had suffered significant military losses, including the loss of its navy and air force, and its cities were being destroyed by Allied bombing campaigns. The Soviet Union had also declared war on Japan, and its armies were advancing rapidly towards Japanese-held territories in Asia. In addition, Japan's economy was severely weakened, with shortages of food, fuel, and other resources. The United States had imposed a naval blockade and economic sanctions, further worsening Japan's situation. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States in August 1945 played a significant role in Japan's decision to surrender. The bombings caused immense destruction and loss of life. Finally, the Soviet Union was about to begin a full-scale military attack on Japan with a troop of about 1.5 million soldiers, breaking the Soviet-Japanese Non-Aggression Pact. The Japanese government realized that it could not continue the war under such circumstances. All of these factors led to Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, which marked the end of World War II. Japan surrendered in World War II primarily due to a combination of factors, including military defeats, strategic considerations, and the use of atomic bombs. Here are the key reasons. 1. Military defeats. By 1945, Japan had suffered a series of significant military defeats. The Allied forces, particularly the United States, had successfully conducted a relentless campaign of island hopping in the Pacific. gradually pushing Japanese forces back and gaining control of strategic positions. The battles of Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa inflicted heavy losses on Japan's military. 2. Strategic bombing. The United States carried out intense strategic bombing campaigns against Japanese cities, including the firebombing of Tokyo. These bombings caused widespread destruction, loss of civilian lives, and undermined Japan's industrial and transportation infrastructure. 3. Economic and resource constraints. Japan faced severe economic challenges during the war. Its resource supplies were strained, including shortages of oil, food, and raw materials. The U.S. naval blockade further hindered Japan's ability to sustain its war effort and provide for its population. 4. Soviet Union's entry. In August 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and launched a massive offensive in Manchuria. The Soviet advance, along with their successful defeat of Japanese forces, played a crucial role in Japan's decision to surrender. 5. Atomic bombs. The United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. These bombings resulted in immense devastation, loss of life, and demonstrated the destructive power of nuclear weapons. The bombings, coupled with the Soviet invasion, left Japan with little choice but to surrender. 6. Emperor Hirohito's intervention. Emperor Hirohito, influenced by the bombings, the Soviet invasion, and Japan's deteriorating situation, played a significant role in the decision to surrender. His unprecedented public announcement, the Imperial Rescript on Surrender, on August 15, 1945, called for Japan's acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration and the end of the war. It's important to note that Japan's surrender marked the end of World War II in the Pacific, bringing about a cessation of hostilities and the occupation of Japan. Japan's surrender. Just before midnight on August 9, Japanese Emperor Hirohito convened the Supreme War Council. After a long, emotional debate, he backed a proposal by Prime Minister Suzuki in which Japan would accept the Potsdam Declaration, with the understanding that said declaration does not compromise any demand that prejudices the prerogatives of His Majesty as the sovereign ruler. The council obeyed Hirohito's acceptance of peace, and on August 10 the message was relayed to the United States. Early on August 12, the United States answered that the authority of the Emperor and the Japanese government to rule the state shall be subject to the Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers. After 2 days of debate about what this statement implied, Emperor Hirohito brushed the nuances in the text aside and declared that peace was preferable to destruction. He ordered the Japanese government to prepare a text accepting surrender. In the early hours of August 15, a military coup was attempted by a faction led by Major Kenji Hatanaka. The rebels seized control of the Imperial Palace and burned Prime Minister Suzuki's residence, but shortly after dawn the coup was crushed. At noon that day, Emperor Hirohito went on national radio for the first time to announce the Japanese surrender. In his unfamiliar court language, he told his subjects, "We have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all the generations to come by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable." The United States immediately accepted Japan's surrender. President Truman appointed MacArthur to head the Allied occupation of Japan as Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers. For the site of Japan's formal surrender, Truman chose the USS Missouri, a battleship that had seen considerable action in the Pacific and was named after Truman's native state. MacArthur, instructed to preside over the surrender, held off the ceremony until September 2 in order to allow time for representatives of all the major Allied powers to arrive. On Sunday, September 2, more than 250 Allied warships lay at anchor in Tokyo Bay. The flags of the United States, Britain, the Soviet Union, and China fluttered above the deck of the Missouri. Just after 9 a.m. Tokyo time, Japanese Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed on behalf of the Japanese government. General Yoshijiro Umezu then signed for the Japanese Armed Forces, and his aides wept as he made his signature. Supreme Commander MacArthur next signed, declaring, It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. 9 more signatures were made by the United States, China, Britain, the USSR, Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, and New Zealand, respectively. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz signed for the United States. As the 20-minute ceremony ended, the sun burst through low-hanging clouds. The most devastating war in human history was over. A debate on one matter, that is, dropping of the bomb. Some say it was deadly and there were other ways in which Japan would surrender, but the others say it was necessary to bomb to made Japan surrender. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing our channel if you like this video.